In the 1940s, Los Angeles became the scene of one of the most gruesome murders in history. A woman was found brutally severed in half, her organs removed, carefully cleaned, and placed back inside her body. Her lifeless form was discarded in an empty lot, posing more like a chilling message than a crime scene. Today, we are diving deep into a case so shocking it ranks among the world's bloodiest murders, the infamous Black Dahlia case. The central figure of this story is Elizabeth Short, born in July 1924 in Massachusetts, USA. Her father, Cleo, was a miniature golf course designer, and her mother was a housewife. Elizabeth had 4 sisters and was the third child in the family. The entire family lived in Boston. In 1929, the United States fell into the Great Depression. Many people lost their jobs. Elizabeth's father not only lost his job, but the family savings were also depleted due to the stock market crash. One morning, he drove off alone and then disappeared. The police found his car on a bridge, but there was no sign of him. He was believed to have taken his own life due to overwhelming financial stress. In the days that followed, Elizabeth's mother found a job as an accountant and raised 5 children alone. However, her income was not enough to support the entire family, and she had to rely on financial assistance. Life was very difficult. Despite this hardship, Elizabeth's mother remained persistent in taking her children to the movies every weekend. Through the glamorous character on the screen, they escaped from the grim reality. During this time, a dream of becoming an actress took root in Elizabeth's heart. Winters in Boston were harsh, and Elizabeth had a fragile health. She suffered from lung disease, and the cold climate was detrimental to her condition. She needed to live in a warmer place. In the winter of 1940, after dropping out of high school at the age of 16, Elizabeth moved to Florida to live with relatives. Florida was a popular vacation spot in the US, and its warm climate made her feel much better. 2 years later, Elizabeth's mother received a letter from her supposedly deceased husband. In the letter, he explained that, overwhelmed by stress, he had faked his death to escape reality. He was now living in California and wanted to reunite with his family. Elizabeth's mother felt both joy and anger. She firmly refused his request. Knowing that his daughter suffered from lung disease, her father began sending Elizabeth $200 each month and invited her to live with him in California. The world-famous Hollywood is also in California. Since childhood, Elizabeth had dreamed of becoming an actress. If she moved there, she would have better opportunities. Later that year, 18 years old, Elizabeth arrived in Vallejo, California to live with her father. However, their father-daughter relationship was strained. Elizabeth did not do the housework and often strayed out all night. Her father constantly scolded her for this. Their relationship eventually broke down completely. A month later, Elizabeth left her father's house and moved to Los Angeles, about 600 kilometers away. 8 months after arriving in Los Angeles, one evening, Elizabeth was dining with a group of friends at the restaurant. However, they were too loud and too noisy. The restaurant owner called the police. Everyone was taken into custody. The local legal drinking age was 21, but Elizabeth was only 19. Because of this, the police took her fingerprints and contacted her father. However, he told them he had cut ties with her and wanted nothing to do with the situation. Elizabeth was sent back to her mother's home in Boston. In 1945, at the age of 21, Elizabeth's lung disease worsened. She returned to Florida for treatment. During this time, she met a man named Gordon, a 26-year-old U.S. Air Force major. They quickly fell in love. At that time, World War II was ongoing. Gordon was deployed to battlefield. Before leaving, he told Elizabeth to stay safe and wait for him to return so they could get married. While Gordon was on duty, they frequently exchanged letters. Elizabeth even told people that she was married to Gordon and was waiting for her husband to return. However, fate was cruel to Elizabeth. On August 10, 1945, just before World War II ended, Gordon's plane crashed and he was killed in the accident. Upon receiving the news, Elizabeth was devastated. She spent her days drowning in sorrows and alcohol. A year later, in an attempt to move on, Elizabeth sought a new romance. She returned to Los Angeles and reconnected with an ex-boyfriend, Joseph. They lived together for a few weeks, but after a fierce argument, they broke up. Elizabeth then found a job as a waitress at the restaurant on Hollywood Boulevard and rented a nearby room. Every night, she frequented bars and spent extravagantly. She quickly burned through her earnings. She even struggled to afford her $1 per day rent. When she was completely out of money, she resorted to prostitution to get food and alcohol. Elizabeth met a married salesman named Robert. 2 weeks after they met, they went on a trip to San Diego together. Robert dropped Elizabeth off at the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles before driving away. However, tragedy soon struck Elizabeth. What happened next? Let's turn back time to January 15, 1947, to uncover the horrifying details. It was a Wednesday morning, around 10 a.m. A woman named Betty Bersinger was walking with her 3-year-old daughter to a shoe store. She noticed something on an empty lot nearby. It looked like a mannequin. Curious, Bersinger held her daughter's hand and cautiously walked closer. She discovered a woman's body lying on the ground, cut in half at the waist. The woman was completely naked. Terrified, she quickly took her daughter away and called the police. Minutes later, a large number of police officers arrived at the scene. They cordoned off the area and began their investigation. The woman's body was severed at the waist. The upper half was lying face up, with her arms raised above her head. Her chest has been mutilated, and the corners of her mouth has been slashed up to her ears. Her lower half lay separately, legs stretched out and spread over 60 degrees apart. The body had been completely drained of blood and washed clean. Her internal organ has been removed, then placed back inside her body. Her wrist, ankle, and neck bore signs of severe restraint. Burnt marks from cigarettes were found on her body. Near the scene, police found several empty cement sacks stained with dried blood. It was believed that these sacks were used to transport the body. No personal belongings were found at the scene. Based on lividity patterns, police estimated the body was dumped around 2 a.m. It was clear that this was not the primary crime scene. The victim had likely been tortured for days before her body was discarded. An autopsy revealed that the victim was 1.65 meters or 5'5" in tall and weighed about 52 kilograms, 115 pounds. Some of her internal organs were missing. A rose tattoo on her thigh had been cut off and placed inside her body. Her stomach contained a large amount of fecal matter, suggesting she has been forced to ingest it before death. She had multiple injuries from knives, blunt objects, and other tools, indicating prolonged torture. The cause of death was determined to be exsanguination due to facial wounds. Police released details in hope that someone would recognize the victim. However, no one came forward. Desperately, they decided to use fingerprint identification. At that time, only criminals had their fingerprints recorded. Surprisingly, they found a match. The victim was identified as Elizabeth Short. She was arrested for drinking illegally and had her fingerprints recorded. After the case was reported in the press, it caused a public sensation. Elizabeth, when she was alive, liked to wear black and often wore a large dahlia flower on her head. Because of this, the newspapers called her the Black Dahlia. Soon, the name Black Dahlia spread across America. The public was extremely interested in the case. and the action of the perpetrator terrified everyone. All hoped the police would quickly solve the crime. After identifying the victim, the police immediately sought out her lover, Robert. He claimed that after returning from a trip to San Diego on January 9th, he and Elizabeth came back to Los Angeles. At that time, Elizabeth told him that her sister would be coming from Boston to find her in Los Angeles. Robert then dropped her off at Biltmore Hotel and then drove away. The police conducted 2 polygraph tests on Robert. He passed both. Thus, he was temporarily ruled out as a suspect. A hotel employee at the Biltmore, where Elizabeth stayed, stated that they had seen her using the hotel lobby phone on the night of January 9th. After that, she was never seen again. 1 kilometer away from the Biltmore Hotel, there was another hotel named Cecil Hotel. A witness claimed to have seen Elizabeth at the bar on the first floor of the Cecil Hotel with several other women. Afterward, their whereabouts became unknown, and the identities of the women were never determined. The police investigated Joseph, Elizabeth's ex-boyfriend, suspecting him of committing the crime due to jealousy. According to the investigation, even after their breakup, Joseph and Elizabeth remained in contact through letters, and Joseph even sent her money several times. However, at the time of the murder, Joseph was not in Los Angeles and had a clear alibi, so he was ruled out as a suspect. 7 days after the murder, the Los Angeles Examiner newspaper received a phone call. The caller identified himself as the murderer of Elizabeth and congratulated the newspaper for covering the case. He also said he would send some of Elizabeth's personal belongings as proof. 10 days after the murder, the Los Angeles Examiner actually received a package. Inside were Elizabeth's birth certificate, business cards, photographs, and an address book containing the phone numbers of 73 men connected to her. The envelope had a return address. The police suspected that the package had indeed been sent by the murderer. They examined it for fingerprints but found none. It has been wiped clean with gasoline. The police investigated all 73 men listed in the address book, but found none connections between them and the crime. The return address on the package led to Mark Hansen, a theater owner and Elizabeth's former landlord. From June to October 1946, Elizabeth lived in Mark's house multiple times as a paid guest. Mark had once confessed his feeling to Elizabeth, but she rejected him. One day before her murder, he had called her. The police speculated that Mark might have discovered that Elizabeth was involved with Robert, a married man, and killed her out of jealousy. However, they found no evidence to support this theory. Despite this, Mark remained a key suspect. Around the same time, police found Elizabeth's black handbag and suit shoes in a trash bin 3 kilometers from the crime scene. These items had also been wiped clean with gasoline to destroy any fingerprints. 12 days after the murder, the police received another letter. It read, "Wednesday, January 29th, 10 a.m. is the turning point. I will go to the police and turn myself in." The police believed that the murderer might surrender that day. However, he never appeared at the designated time. That afternoon at 1 p.m., the police received another letter stating, "I have changed my mind. You cannot treat me fairly. Killing the Black Dahlia was justified." The police and the newspaper continued to receive several more letters, but most were believed to be hoaxes. Since all the items sent by the killer had been cleaned with gasoline, the police were unable to collect any fingerprints, leaving the investigation at a dead end. Based on precise dismemberment of Elizabeth's body, forensic experts believe that the killer possessed advanced surgical skills. He was likely a surgeon or someone with the knowledge of anatomy. A medical school was located near the crime scene. 1 month after the murder, the police obtained a list of all medical students and investigated several suspects, but found no useful evidence. Following the murder, the Los Angeles Police Department assigned 750 officers to the investigation. A $10,000 reward was offered for any leads. Although many people came forward with tips, all were false, and some were even charged with providing misleading information. Due to Elizabeth's wide social circle, the police spent 3 years investigating, interviewing over 1,000 people. Elizabeth's body was buried in Oakland, California. One of the most suspicious suspects was Walter Bailey, a surgeon. He lived in a neighborhood close where Elizabeth's body was found. His daughter was friends with Elizabeth's sister, meaning he might have known Elizabeth. Bailey died in January 1948, 1 year after the murder. An autopsy revealed he suffered from a degenerative brain disease, which could have caused impulsive and violent behavior. However, at the time of the murder, Bailey was 67 years old with no criminal record. In 2017, British author Hugh Idwell wrote a book arguing that Leslie was a true killer and Mark Hansen was the mastermind. Her book claimed that the first crime scene was at the Astro Motel in Los Angeles. The motel owner found a blood-soaked room in the morning of January 15, 1947, the day Elizabeth's body was discovered. However, since he had a criminal record for domestic violence, he didn't want to get involved and simply cleaned the room. All suspects related to the Black Dahlia case have passed away, and the case files have not been made public. Therefore, the accuracy of what the writer Hugh Idwell wrote cannot be verified. One of the suspects, George Hodel, was a doctor in Los Angeles who ran a clinic specializing in the treatment of sexually transmitted diseases. George had studied surgical techniques during his education and had a certain level of knowledge about anatomy. 2 years before the Black Dahlia case occurred, George's secretary died from a drug overdose. Later, George burned some of the secretary's belongings at the scene. The police suspected that the secretary's death was not an accident, but could have been caused by George, but they could not find concrete evidence. 2 years after the Black Dahlia case, George's daughter reported to the police that her father had abused her and made her pregnant. At the time, there were some witnesses, but George's family denied the allegation. His wife and daughter also claimed that on the night of the Black Dahlia murder, George did not return home. Additionally, the police found a witness who stated that they saw a black car parked near the vacant lot where Elizabeth's body was found that night. George also owned a black car. Other witnesses confirmed that George and Elizabeth had met shortly before the case occurred. Some people had even seen them together at a hotel. After gathering these clues, the police considered George highly suspicious. They installed a wiretap in his home and recorded him saying, "Supposedly, I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she is dead." The police were unsure what George meant by this statement. His secretary died in 1945, while the Black Dahlia case happened in 1947. The authorities wanted to continue the investigation, but George left the US and moved to the Philippines. In the 1990s, he returned to California and passed away on January 16, 1999, at the age of 91. Steve Hodel, George's son, was a retired police officer who had previously investigated the Black Dahlia case. While sorting through his late father's belongings, he discovered 2 photographs of a woman who looked very similar to Elizabeth. However, Elizabeth's family denied that the woman in the picture was her. As a retired officer, Steve found documents related to the Black Dahlia case. He compared George's handwritten notes with the letters allegedly sent by the murderer to the press and found that the handwriting was very similar. However, Steve's conclusions were not entirely reliable. In his book, he also claimed that his father was the infamous Zodiac killer, but his reasoning was weak and unconvincing. Moreover, during the time of the Zodiac killings, George was in the Philippines, not the US, making it impossible for him to have committed those crimes. Even after more than 7 decades, the Black Dahlia case remained a deep wound in American crime history, a mystery without satisfying answer. Despite numerous suspects, from Surgeon Walter Bailey, amateur writer Leslie, to Dr. George, and the theory put forward by his son Steve, none of them have been proven. The truth behind Elizabeth's death remains shrouded in darkness, leaving endless space for speculation and imagination. Looking back, Elizabeth's short life, we see a young woman with dreams of Hollywood glamour who was tragically caught in life misfortunes, a childhood poverty, an absent father, persistent illnesses, failed romances, and ultimately a brutal